Shall I start? Okay. Lean on the table. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you very much indeed for coming tonight. Thank you especially to our guests who've come some distance tonight, and for those of you from outside the university, welcome to London Met. My name is John Gabriel. I'm the head of the Department of Applied Social Sciences. One of the house announcements was turn off your mobile phones. One of my particular interests and something that I teach on and I've done some project work on is the area of oral history. And I think one of the impetuses behind oral history was its attempt to bring into the mainstream of our historical knowledge individuals and groups who had been hitherto marginalized or excluded from sort of mainstream historical canon. When we learn history at school, we learn about the history of successive parliaments, of the great men of politics, of kings and queens. We tend not to learn about the history of ordinary people and the struggles of ordinary people. And oral history in the 1970s as a movement in this country was committed to reverse that and bring people who were hitherto invisible in the historical record into the spotlight. And I think that's particularly relevant for tonight's event. I'm delighted that we are choosing tonight to celebrate the life and work of Makhan Singh. And I think one of the things that oral history also teaches us, that there are connections between individuals and wider struggles, between individual lives and society, and beyond society, history and the world. And I think Makhan Singh is such a good example of an individual whose life impacted on the lives of others, both in Kenya and in terms of its reverberations around the struggle against imperialism and against colonialism. I'm really delighted to have a range of experts and speakers tonight who will speak about Makhan Singh both as an individual and as a public figure. I wanted to suggest that we perhaps hear the speakers and then have questions and contributions from the floor afterwards, rather than after each of the speakers. And if that's okay with you, then I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who is Shiraz Durrani. I won't spend too much time going through and saying a lot about our speakers because it is in your catalogue for the evening. But I would like to say Shiraz is from London Metropolitan University. He's from the Department of Applied Social Sciences. He lectures in information management, but what's very special, I think, about Shiraz is the work that he's done in showing us and demonstrating to us at least two things. One is the way in which information is not just information, but it has to do with politics and power and social exclusion and social inclusion. He's brought that analysis to the information world, the world of information managers, of librarians, and so on. He's done that at an analytical level, but he's also done it at a practical level. He's worked actively in the world of libraries to support the participation and involvement of young people, particularly young people who had hitherto been excluded from the library sector, and sought ways in which we might bring them in to the world of information. And that has obviously important implications for their knowledge and understanding, and for a rebalancing of knowledge and power. He's a fellow of the librarian professional body, SILIP, and he's written a number of books to do with information globalization, particularly focusing on the Kenyan context. Shiraz.
Right. I think all of you will have heard about Kenya and about Mau Mau and what a fantastic place it is for tourists and rhinos and elephants and so on. I would suspect very few people know about a person like Makhan Singh for a number of reasons, which I'll come back at the end. There is so much information on Makhan Singh that it's difficult to know where to stop and where to start. I think there is the copies of one of the books, recent books on Makhan Singh are on sale here. But in the whole Institute of African, there's a Makhan Singh archives at the Institute of African Studies in Nairobi, which is a fantastic collection of Makhan Singh's papers, and it shows his contribution and his thinking and the meticulous way in which he collected information and analyzed it. So it's not easy to try and sum up the political significance of Makhan Singh in Kenya in, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes. If you all promise to stay for a week, maybe we can sort of scratch the surface a bit more. So let's then start with Makhan Singh himself. I need to keep away from this.
Sorry, is there anything we can do with the sound? Chris, do you know, is there anything we can...
Okay. Kenya's, lots of you will have heard about Mau Mau as well. But Mau Mau just did not grow on trees. It had a solid foundation. And one of the most important foundation for Mau Mau and the whole liberation movement in Kenya was the trade union movement. The trade union movement politicized people. It brought in organization which people could use, and in a sense it brought a class consciousness to the whole struggle. Whereas very many politicians, lots of them opportunists, were sort of looking in terms of a national liberation, and so that they can take over from the colonialists, all these nice jobs and so on. The trade union movement, and Makhan Singh in particular, brought a very strong class analysis. And I think that is the significance of it. So he talks about trade union movement in the context of national struggle, resisting British imperialism. And you don't hear the word imperialism anymore, as if imperialism has died. You hear of globalization, but where is imperialism in all that? So in those days, people used to at least talk the right thing for the right problem. For consolidating the information, consolidating independence after winning it, I think that is a major struggle. And that is where Kenya has gone wrong, and that is where the struggle in South Africa is, as well as in other countries, is at the moment. What do you do after independence? You let this Kenyatta's and Moi's come into power, and they take away billions of pounds and hide it somewhere in some nice safe havens. And the people's conditions are even worse than before. And the key theme was bringing prosperity to the workers and people of Kenya. And I think that is what Makhan Singh stood for. That is what the trade union movement stood for. Very quickly, some facts about Makhan Singh. And I don't want to go too much into it. His date of birth and all. He came to Kenya in 1927, and I think we have people who are more qualified to talk about him later on, so I won't go too much into it. His father had a printing press, and he worked in a printing press, not as a big boss and manager, but as an ordinary worker. And I think a lot of his politics came from doing the actual work on the shop floor. Married certain core, which I think kind of facts like that often tend to get ignored or forgotten, as if these big names don't have families or wives and children and responsibilities at home and so on. In 1939 he went to India. We look at a little later why he went to India. And for whatever he did in India, he was involved in the political struggle for independence of India. He was detained in India for 4.5 years. Now that says a lot about the man who British colonial government does not just imprison people unless they thought they were dangerous. And this man was dangerous, as they found out later. But anyway, he came to Kenya in 1947, and for 11 and a half years, he was imprisoned in Kenya. So really, if you think about the active life of this man, it was very short in terms of what he could do in that short time, and yet he has contributed, I think, more than anybody else in the Kenyan struggle for liberation. Some few facts here and there I selected at random. In March 1935, he was elected Secretary General of the Indian Trade Union. Now, the first thing he did was to influence with other people. Obviously, he wasn't working as a dictator or as a person in his own right. He worked with others to change the name of the union to Labour Trade Union of Kenya, removing the word Indian from it, and opened its doors to workers irrespective of race, religion, and color. Now, that was in 1935. The real class and race issues were not even addressed at the time of independence. But 1935, 36, this is a man who influenced the trade union movement to open its doors to all workers of all races. 1937, he changed the name, then they changed the name to Labour Trade Union of East Africa, because it was getting popular outside Kenya as well, in Tanzania and Uganda. And among the sort of things he did, or the union did, was to go on strike. Now, strike as a weapon is kind of distorted very much today, and or I don't know, it doesn't have the strength that it had once upon a time. But they went on strike for 62 days. Now you can imagine in 1937 for workers to go on strike for over 2 months without wages, surviving and continuing with it. And they did that, and they won a key thing in terms of increased wages. And in all this, they were supported by families, friends, and people from outside also. So it's a huge organizational leap, in a sense, to have an organized strike of 62 days and win it. Part of the thing is that information is important. And among the things that Makhan Singh did, or the trade union did, is to make sure that they communicated with workers and their supporters. Now, in those days, they had no email and Facebook and stuff like that. They could not even control the printing presses, because those were very expensive, mostly owned by white people. Some, there were Asians also. I mustn't distort the story. But they bought, the first thing the union did was buy a typewriter and buy a cyclostyling machine, so they were independent in the message they wanted to give. So this is an example of a leaflet they did in 1935 by the Khalsa Press. And as you notice, it's in 4 or 5 languages. 4 languages. They had others in Kiswahili as well. And just this little bit, I don't know if you can read that, translate what it's trying to say here, or you can't read that. It's talking about a mass rally taking place in Nairobi, and where to decide on effective methods to achieve the demands of railway artisans and the demand of 25% increase in wages from 1st April, signed by Makhan Singh. And there are examples of these leaflets in Makhan Singh archives. So it's worth sort of seeing how they communicated. And interestingly enough, it wasn't just producing the leaflets, it was distributing them as well. So they used to have workers with bicycles ringing bells in working class areas and distributing these leaflets. They had train which went right across the country, and they would take these leaflets all over the place. So if there was a strike in Nairobi, people in Kisumu would know about it, or in Mombasa. So they had a fantastic network of activists who were not only producing information but circulating this information. The strike itself, just that one example, the membership, people saw the value of a union that can achieve their goals, so the membership increased. And more important, the government realized that they could not get away by not recognizing trade union as a workers' organization. So they passed the trade union bill or ordinance or whatever in 1937, and it's under that legislation that the union was registered. And by 1948, the Labour Trade Union of East Africa had 16 trade unions affiliated to it with a membership of 10,000 workers. It was a huge amount, a huge number in 1948 for trade unions. This is one of the leaflets by the union, and it starts with struggle between capitalists and workers has started in earnest. So it was very clear that Makhan Singh and the trade union saw this as a struggle of classes also, that it was a struggle against capitalism. It wasn't just looking at saying British colonialism must go away, because it was obvious that the problem was much deeper than just getting rid of the white settler and replacing him with a black one. And the language, I mean, I won't read this, I think you can read that. But just as an example of one of the leaflets, and the second bit of it is giving an update on another strike taking place, so people know what's happening, and sort of increases support and solidarity among the working class. So in 1939 December, he goes to India to study working class conditions and functioning of the trade unionism in Bombay and Ahmedabad. Now the key thing is that